Brittany, are you there? Just one second. I think I just saw your email.
Okay, it looks like we made it.
Awesome. Thank goodness.
I know those things, they always happen. I'm like, I thought I would check before it actually started. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
look, it
Thank goodness
always
you
happens.
logged in early, right?
I know. Oh, well, I think in the era we're living in, I don't think anybody's surprised when it takes an extra 5, 10 minutes for a presentation to get started. So,
Yeah, yeah. And then of course this is my first like meeting
yeah,
hosting a Zoom meeting. So that's why I was like, I gotta log in early because if
yeah.
I don't,
That was
um
a good idea. I mean, it really
yeah,
is. I tell my paralegals that all the time. I'm like, I know that we've used Teams for every meeting since day one of us moving home, but you should log in like 10 minutes early just in case, because it
for sure.
always happens.
For sure. And now I'm trying to figure out how to use a virtual background.
I don't think it'll let me turn on my camera, but that's okay. I mean, like, I don't have to. I'm not worried about it.
Okay. Okay. At least it shows your face, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's all we can ask for. Even then, even if it didn't, I would be okay with that too.
Yes. Do you know how to upload a virtual or to use a virtual background, because the
Yeah,
directions
so
pulling up on Google are not working?
not helpful. You know where like the camera is that says start video?
Yes.
There's like a little up arrow next to that. You can click that, and then there should be an option that says choose virtual background or choose video filter. You can click the background one. Is it letting you do it? Let me see.
It is, but it looks like I don't have any saved.
Yeah, so then if you have a particular one you want to use for like your organization, like there's like the default ones on there, but then there's like a little plus button. You can click that and upload an image or video to use for your background.
So I'm just going to Google random nice little background
There
where
you go. You can always have like the palm trees in the background, or there's a nice blur effect. But yeah, an office setting is the one I usually go into, like a coffee shop or something.
I just want to bring a nice little vibe to this meeting. So
there you go. There you go.
You're gonna laugh when I pull up this picture.
Like I'm really excited now. The anticipation is killing me.
Well, it's not that special.
Oh, it looks like we have some participants on the line.
Yeah, I think we got a couple folks in here. For the people that are in here, we're going to get started probably around 1:05, just to give people a chance to log in. And if you've been in here listening to our Zoom discussion, just it is what it is. Actually, I ended up finding one that might be a little bit more suitable for what we've got going on here. So just 1 second. Have the post winter storm calls calmed down yet?
No. If only. They're gonna get more and more over the next couple of weeks of people's applications with disaster assistance, whether that be SBA or Fema. Our decisions are being made on those. We really experience kind of like we experience them in like waves, and that goes with the amount that kind of gets denied at one time, and then their 60-day deadlines start and go from there. So we're anticipating probably closer towards the end of the month a surplus of cases coming in. And we also have been running like some statistics based on like data that we're getting for counties and things like that. And I think pretty much around 50% of applicants are getting denied right now. So that's gut wrenching amount of numbers. So we will see. But right now it's the big three: the family law, the housing, the employment. Those are the big cases that are coming in right now.
Okay, I'm gonna see if this works now.
And for those of you that are signing on right now that weren't on our first announcement, we're going to give it a couple more minutes just to see, allow people other opportunities to sign on and let us figure out our tech. But thank you for joining us today. Oh, there you go. Oh, fancy.
Yeah.
It worked.
Can you, is it backwards?
Nope, nope, it looks good.
Okay.
The screen is mirrored. It's showing up.
All right. All right. This is always very glamorous.
Yes.
For those of you joining in, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. Thank you for your patience. All right, Brittany, are you ready?
I am ready.
Awesome. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a Disaster Survivor's Guide to Small Business Administration Loans. We are so excited to have you here for our third training as a part of the Disaster Resilience Awareness Month. Throughout the month of March, Community Legal Services, as well as Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, Disability Rights Texas, Lone Star Legal Aid, and I believe the YMCA Legal Aid will be teaming up with its partners, Equal Justice Works, to spread awareness about disaster-related legal challenges and share resources for disaster preparedness and recovery efforts. For more information on this series and to join us in spreading awareness, be sure to follow Equal Justice Works, as well as Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida on Twitter and Facebook, where you'll find updates on the subsequent presentations that will be a part of Disaster Resilience Awareness Month. This presentation is being recorded, so if you need to leave early for any reason, please do not be afraid. Reach out to us afterwards and we'll send you the link to the recording. If you have any questions or comments for us, please feel free to type them in the chat function. And then we'll answer questions toward the end of this presentation. It's my plan for Brittany and I to speak for about 45 minutes. I'm not sure if it'll take that long, but if it does not, that just gives us extra time for questions. And then at the end, we'll have about 15 minutes to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Brianna Williams. I am the Equal Justice Works Disaster Resilience Fellow at Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. This presentation is also being hosted by Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. And as I stated before, this will be posted on our Facebook page as well as our other social media pages after we get the link to the recording. For accessibility purposes, we have also drafted some written materials. Those will also be available after the presentation. And then Equal Justice Works will also post a recording of this presentation on their YouTube page. And on that YouTube page, you'll be able to use closed captioning and things like that. So next, I want to get to introducing our panelist for today. She is a rising star in the area of disaster law, and her name is Brittanny Perrigue. Am I getting that? Do I have that right?
Yeah, it's Brittanny Perrigue, and then I was recently married 3 months ago, I guess. So it's Brittanny Gomez now.
Oh, okay, so Brittanny Perrigue Gomez, got it, with Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. Brittanny is a disaster benefits team member and represents low-income individuals affected by disasters. Brittanny is a vice director of the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division, a disaster legal services team, and has been recognized by Forbes magazine 30 Under 30 Law and Policy for helping clients who are affected by community and natural disasters. Prior to working for Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, Brittanny was an attorney at the U.S. Small Business Administration. While working at the Small Business Administration, she assisted disaster survivors from Florida, Texas, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and California in their recovery from natural disasters. As an Equal Justice Works Disaster Recovery Legal Corps Fellow, she provided legal services to residents of counties in South and West Texas who were directly impacted by disasters. Brittanny primarily works on direct service cases, specifically Fema, Sba, and Texas Health and Human Services Other Needs Assistance cases. She also organizes and participates in community education and outreach projects, as well as assists disaster survivors in clearing title to their homes. Brittanny is a graduate from Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas, and St. Mary's University School of Law in San Antonio, Texas. Thank you so much for joining us, Brittanny.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The way this is going to work is that I'm essentially going to ask Brittanny questions, and she will give us some wonderful answers that will hopefully, answer business administration loans. Again, if you have any questions that pop up throughout this presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat. And I see we've got some comments. Yes, and feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will try to answer all that we can in the time that we have remaining in this presentation. Um, so let's get started. Alrighty, so just to begin, I want to start by covering why this is important. Why is it important to talk about small business administration loans and other types of disaster preparedness things at this point in the year, and why folks should, prepare for disasters ahead of time?
Yeah, so the perfect example of this is my home state of Texas, which just went through a massive winter storm. We are used to hurricanes and tornadoes, floods, etc., wildfires in our more rural areas, but never once did we think we would have a winter storm that would basically wipe the state off the grid, the power grid. And so this is a perfect example of why disasters are becoming more frequent, more severe, and definitely less predictable, as evidenced recently in the past few weeks. And so, it's just important to plan and be prepared. It's something our organizations and most legal aids are definitely focusing on, is the preparation aspect of legal disaster preparedness for our client communities, to ensure that them and their families are able to recover if and when affected by a natural disaster.
Wonderful. And so I also want to talk about how long does the disaster recovery process last? And is that affected by the level of preparation that occurs ahead of time?
Yeah, so as to the first question about how long a disaster lasts, it's, a couple factors go into that, depending on the catastrophic nature of the disaster, right? So we worked on Hurricane Harvey cases and some Hurricane Katrina cases. Hurricane Harvey cases we anticipate to be around, and some issues not to be resolved for, decades after this storm. Some of those systemic legal issues that are going to continue to have to be litigated or pressed for answers. Smaller disasters, the recovery might be a little bit faster than something as catastrophic as Katrina and Harvey, or maybe even the California wildfires. But preparedness definitely goes into the length of recovery for our clients, right? So if a disaster survivor doesn't have clear title to their home, they may not have been able to get the proper insurance coverage. So now that they are unable to have insurance on their home, they're looking at getting assistance from maybe disaster assistance agencies like Fema or the Small Business Administration. Both have different standards for home ownership. If they meet those standards, great, they might get some assistance, but it won't be enough to make them whole again. It's not intended to make them whole like insurance. And then additionally, if they don't meet any of those ownership standards, then they're looking really towards limited voluntary resources to be able to aid them in replacing or repairing their homes as well as their personal property. So their recovery will be very limited in that circumstance. And if they had the opportunity to get access to legal services, and legal services was able to assist them in clearing title to their home, then their recovery could happen much quicker and make them more whole in terms of what they can recover from. So yeah, they're definitely linked hand in hand.
Awesome. Yes, exactly. And next, I kind of want to discuss why, or what is the SBA? What is the Small Business Administration? I know when I first talked with you about this topic, I told you that I had no idea, what do Small Business Administration loans have to do with disasters? And I think that might be a misconception that other folks may have as well. So next I want to talk about, what does the Small Business Administration have to do with disaster? How do they help disaster survivors?
Yeah, of course. And the name is incredibly confusing, at least in the disaster context, because the Small Business Administration is authorized by the Small Business Act to assist in a disaster situation by providing disaster loans. And those loans can be for businesses, as the name of the agency would suggest, but they can also help individuals such as homeowners or renters repair or replace personal property or real property transportation that is affected as the result of a natural disaster. It's not just activated during major disaster declarations. There are options where the Small Business Administration can help outside of a major disaster declaration, like the winter storms or Hurricane Harvey or the California wildfires. They can assist in smaller situations. But yeah, the SBA can help by providing financial assistance to individuals, renters, small businesses, most nonprofit organizations, following a disaster situation in the form of low interest, long-term loans.
Awesome. And so who is eligible for SBA assistance, specifically small business or disaster loan assistance?
Yeah, so the applicants generally need to be the owner or the occupant of the damaged property. The damaged property will need to have been their primary residence. So in the situation where a person may live in one home but has a second home that they use as a rental property, they could potentially, get a home repair loan for their house and then a business loan for their rental property. They need to be in the disaster declared area. They need to be of contracting age, meaning they have to have the capacity to sign a contract. And that'll vary by state. In Texas, it's generally 18 years of age, and there's some exceptions to that. But they need to be able to consent to signing loan documents. And that's generally there so we don't have, minor children signing mortgage documents and agreeing to things that they can't. And then they need to be a U.S. citizen, non-citizen, national, or qualified alien. And those are the same immigration statuses that apply for FEMA as well. And then they'll need to be able to prove that they own the real or personal property.
Got it. And so that kind of brings us right into the next topic that I want to discuss, which is the link between Small Business Administration loans as well as FEMA. So what do SBA loans have to do with FEMA? How are they connected?
Yeah, so disaster assistance agencies, particularly FEMA and SBA, do have an overlap and interplay in the type of assistance that they can provide for. Generally, federal agencies, including insurance, are precluded from, duplicating benefits or providing assistance that one agency may have already provided for. So a simple example of that might be if the SBA is going to lend for home repair assistance, then FEMA is not going to be able to give home repair grant assistance to the same person. There is a particular area that comes up known as other needs assistance, and that generally encompasses personal property, moving and storage, transportation, and some forms of group flood insurance that are SBA dependent forms, meaning that if a disaster survivor applies for FEMA and FEMA deems that person to, possibly have the ability to repay the loan or qualify or be eligible for an SBA disaster loan, they will get referred to SBA. And if they are approved for SBA assistance, and it happens to be one of these other needs forms, such as personal property, moving and storage, or transportation, they have a couple of options. They can accept the loan and take the loan proceeds and use that to repair or replace those items, or they can decline the loan. If they decline the loan and it is personal property and moving and storage or other needs assistance type of aid, they will be precluded from receiving grant assistance from FEMA for those items. There is a difference. This does not apply for home repair or replacement assistance from FEMA, but just those certain types of SBA dependent other needs assistance. So if a disaster survivor applies for FEMA and FEMA refers them to SBA for home repair, and let's say that disaster survivor is approved for home repair assistance from the Small Business Administration. In that context, the disaster survivor would be able to decline the SBA home repair loan and still get grant assistance from FEMA for home repair. So there's no duplication there. there are certain circumstances in which a client may want to do that, and they may have less of full recovery if they do decline the SBA loan, but they may not be able to financially pay or stay without breaching the terms of the loan. And so grant assistance, while it will likely be less than what the SBA would offer, FEMA benefits are a grant. They don't have to be repaid. And so that might be something that's more beneficial for your client in the long term than attaining a loan where they would need to pay monthly payments.
Got it. And so I guess that transitions into, what should clients or residents be aware of after disaster in regards to the communication between SBA and FEMA? What I mean is that, if someone is denied SBA loan, does SBA communicate with FEMA and vice versa? And how should a resident applying for assistance navigate that?
Yeah, so generally the interagency referral process typically happens and a disaster survivor doesn't even realize it. Most times, our clients at Trala, our client community doesn't necessarily qualify for the SBA loan. And so they never realize that, FEMA has sent their information over to SBA. SBA has deemed them not eligible, and then they get grant assistance from FEMA. That generally happens, and they just see that they get grant assistance from FEMA. There are certain circumstances or times where after a major disaster like Katrina or Harvey or something like that, where maybe the agencies are overwhelmed, the SBA will send out loan applications to certain disaster survivors. In that circumstance, I would advise my client to, one, make sure that it's not a scam and confirm with the Small Business Administration that that loan application is actually from the SBA. And then they would likely need to fill out those documents. Otherwise, if they don't and get the determination from SBA as to whether or not they're eligible or not, they may inadvertently preclude themselves from that other needs assistance or personal property transportation assistance from the agency. There are circumstances in which, so as I mentioned before, to be eligible, one person in the household needs to be a citizen or a legal permanent resident or qualified alien. That one person can be a minor child, which comes up with a couple of issues with the SBA, right? If they're a minor, they likely can't sign the loan documents. And the reason why I bring that up in this context is because sometimes when a minor child is the applicant for FEMA assistance for the household, their application will get sent to SBA and it kind of gets stuck, right? The SBA needs to refer it back to FEMA for grant assistance because that minor child is ineligible to receive an SBA loan. But sometimes the interagency referral process kind of has some quirks, and those cases, often an attorney will need to kind of step in and explain, hey, this is a minor child, they can't contract for debt legally within the state, you need to refer this back. And we've stepped in a couple of those.
Sure. And you mentioned briefly before that there's a reason why certain folks qualify, or there's a reason why many of your clients don't qualify for SBA loans. Can you expand upon that briefly?
Yeah, so I mean, there's several reasons why our clients may not qualify. Steady income, consistent income can be one. Generally, the SBA considers itself like a lender of last resort, so it kind of works opposite of the traditional lending market. Meaning, if a client has decent decent income and credit is okay, not excellent, but it's not really bad, they may qualify. But often the barriers to that become like low property values, cause issues. Individuals who maybe seasonal workers that need to find a different way to be able to prove their repayment ability to the SBA. We've worked on cases like that too, where we've had clients who are seasonal workers or maybe like temporary workers. They do like gig workers. And so proving their income, they're not going to have like a typical pay stub. And being able to put together the appropriate documents for the SBA might do that. But generally, like I was saying, they work opposite of the traditional lending market. So if a client isn't able to necessarily get a home repair loan from a bank, the SBA may be able to assist them, but they do need to, still be able to qualify and meet that repayment ability standard that the SBA has.
Got it. Thank you. So next, I want to go into how do we apply, or how does one apply for an SBA loan? And to do that, or to explain that, I want to take us to another presentation, and I will attempt to share my screen. If you were here before the presentation started, you heard that this is my first Zoom presentation. So just give me a bit and let's hope that this works out. Just one moment. All right, can anyone see my screen? Or Brittany, can you see my screen?
I do not think it is showing.
Right.
Oh wait, actually, yes, now it is.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm just going to take them through these slides. And Brittany, if you can just navigate me and tell me where to go.
Yeah, so this is the general SBA application process and how to apply for a loan. The example here is for a business, but it is a disaster loan application. And it should be noted that some of this might actually have changed due to the pandemic and the questions that they ask. But for the most part, this is what a general disaster loan application process starts. So a disaster survivor will go to disasterassistance.gov. Or they can go to the U.S. Small Business Administration website and hit apply for assistance. It will likely take them to disasterassistance.gov. And so this is the disaster loan portal in which they can apply. So if we can go to the next slide. So you'll see here in the registration part, just like with pretty much any application, you either already have a login, so maybe a prior disaster survivor has already applied for assistance in the past, or they can register. They'll want to make sure that they go through that process. So we can go to the next one. And then they will, here is where they will probably emphasize whether or not that they are a individual impacted by a natural disaster or a business or nonprofit. Next slide. And then this is the slide for small businesses that can apply for assistance, but generally we can assume that the individual assistance side will also look similar to this to explain whether they are homeowners or renters. In addition, businesses are sole proprietorships, partnerships, LLCs or LLPs, and then what type of assistance they're applying for. So real property would be those home repair loans, or for businesses, leasehold improvements. Personal property would be listed here for a homeowner or a renter, but for a business, that machinery and equipment. Economic injury, those are going to be for businesses only, and that's going to be the lost profits, or what SBA will call idle loan proceeds. Next slide. The next slide will be the discussion about, which disaster are they impacted by, right? So what state are they in? What county are they in? Just gathering that information about the disaster impacted community or individual. Next slide. They will have to then identify which disaster. So a series of disasters are going to come up, and then they will make a determination, right? So presumably in not Virginia, let's use an example that I'm familiar with, Hurricane Harvey or the Rio Grande Valley floods, or even the winter storm. Those will be listed here under the disaster name, and then it'll explain. And as I was talking about before, right, I mentioned that the SBA can assist in major declared disasters, which is the second option here that's listed, right? That 2020 Presidential Individual Assistance Disaster Declaration. But in instances where it's not a major disaster declaration, as seen in the example above that, is a 2020 agency disaster declaration. And that's where the SBA can step in and help in smaller situations. Next slide. So then the borrower or the disaster survivor will basically sign a certification as to truthful information. stating that, you know, all the information that they're providing in this application, as it is a loan application, is true. And none of it is meant to be a false statement or misrepresentation to the Small Business Administration. And then ultimately it lists the consequences of providing false or misrepresenting information to the government, such as, you know, trouble damages, civil penalties, criminal penalties as well. So they'll be asked to certify and then move to the next slide. So on this slide, the Small Business Administration is gathering, you know, for this example, it's a business. They'll be gathering information about the business, what it is, what their, you know, primary use is. But for an individual, they're going to be gathering a lot of personal identifying information. So you want to make sure that, you know, your client, if they are filling this out, that they're, you know, providing the right information and not, you know, information for somebody else. And that they're completing it as themselves. And then personal financial information, because like I said, it is a loan, unlike FEMA, that is a grant. So SBA is going to want to know, you know, all of this personal financial information to determine the ability to repay the loan. And then they'll also want to know like extended debts, or, you know, your debt to income ratio type of information. And then the SBA, both for businesses and individuals, will require up-to-date tax return information. So next slide. And then throughout the application process, they're going to be asking additional information, right? So they're going to want to know about if there's ever been any bankruptcies for your client or for the business, whether or not there are any outstanding judgments, unpaid child support, property liens, things like that. They have a general prohibition from lending to individuals who may have engaged in civil riots or civil disorder and that have had been convicted of that. So they'll get asked that question. Whether or not they have other loans and what are the extent that those are backed by the federal government. Are they behind on their federal income taxes, or are they delinquent? If they have a payment plan, they'll want information about that. Have they ever worked for the Small Business Administration? Next slide. And then there's a series of paper applications. Now, a lot of these are dedicated to the business loan applicants, but for the most part, they're going to have to sign a form saying, authorizing the SBA to reach out to the IRS to get that tax information. They'll have to sign forms, you know, disclosing their social security number, so that they can do background checks and all of that. Next slide. And then here they will, if they have a copy of their tax transcript or tax return, they'll be able to upload that. Again, both for businesses and for individuals, they can go ahead and upload that. If not, they should be able to continue past that part of the loan application and then provide it to a disaster loan case manager or loan officer when the application has moved past that point into the review phase. And then they basically, next slide. And basically from there, they will be provided an application number, as you can see here, and then they will get updates in their message portal about the status of their loan. But it's important to keep this application number. They'll need it every time they talk to somebody, a case manager at the Small Business Administration about their loan. Additionally, if they come to get legal services, they will need to use that application number to identify how to get their loan documents, maybe through a FOIA request, or if they need to do a loan modification or something. But that is, like FEMA gives a identifying number, a registration number, this application number is the identifying number for the individual. But that's generally the application process.
All right. So
and I did see Julie had a question about whether or not Trala does community workshops on explaining SBA forms. The disaster benefits team doesn't. We do have a micro enterprise team They may have since pandemic with the PPP loan through the SBA, but I think generally we try to get, maybe like Lyft Fund was doing micro loans or grant assistance for our small businesses. And then there are different small business, I can't think of the word, basically small business advisors in some of our communities that will help them out.
Thank you for that question, Julie. Right, so now that we've explained how to apply, I think it's important for us to move into what can a resident use that small business loan money for if they are provided assistance.
Yeah, so when a disaster survivor applies for a loan and they are approved, they will be approved, their loan proceeds will be approved for certain usages. And the breakdown of that will be listed in their loan authorization and agreement. That's really the document that's going to contain all the terms and conditions of their loans, especially if they're unsecured. If they're secured, you'll want to look at deeds of trusts and things like that. But for the most part, the loan authorization and agreement is going to contain the breakdown of loan proceeds. And that can be, a certain allocation of money for home repair assistance or home replacement assistance. Some can be for personal property or transportation. And then the SBA does offer the ability to obtain loan proceeds for mitigation. So maybe storm windows or storm shutters or raising a house prior to it needing to be raised out of a flood zone. So there is the ability to get mitigation funds. And then for businesses, that loan proceed breakdown will look something like, structural repair, replacement, or it'll tell you what the lost profit assistance is, as well as what can be used to replace inventory or anything like that.
And so you mentioned briefly I'm sorry, just got one question. Since we're running low on time, I will try to answer that question towards the end, okay? So next I want to talk about the type of assistance that a borrower can receive for home and personal property. Can we discuss a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so homeowners' max cap of assistance is statutorily limited at $200,000 for the repair or replacement of a disaster damaged primary residence. And so those funds can be used to repair or replace personal property or home repair. The SBA does offer an option to refinance existing mortgages, and like I mentioned, those mitigation properties proceeds as well. Homeowners and renters can borrow up to $40,000 for replacement of damaged or destroyed personal property, and that can include auto loans. It should be noted that anything over $25,000 in loan proceeds is going to be a secured loan, meaning if it's over $25,000 and it's a home repair loan, the collateral for that loan will likely be the damaged property. And the Small Business Administration generally doesn't decline to lend for lack of collateral or if the loan is going to be undersecured. But if there is the collateral to be secured, they will use that for the loan. So anything over $25,000 is going to be secured. The exception to that is an all personal property loan or maybe an all auto loan. That's $40,000 or less. That does not have to be secured. The loans are generally low interest. So for homeowners or renters, individuals, not businesses, the interest rate is generally around 1.75%. And for businesses, it starts somewhere about 3.5%. And I mentioned earlier that, the lower your credit score, the better the interest rate with the Small Business Administration. So, and that's because of that lender of last resort requirement. And the maturity dates on the loans are about 30 years. That can be adjusted, but it's important to keep in mind that if you shorten the maturity date on that, the monthly payments will likely get larger. And then there are instances where the SBA disaster loans may be used to help an applicant or a disaster survivor relocate. They don't necessarily have to relocate from the property, the land in which the home was built on. Really what that means is the SBA is basically going to lend to either get, you know, a new MHU or sorry, mobile home unit, or maybe a new RV, or build a new home on that piece of land. They don't necessarily have to completely up and leave their property.
Thank you for that, Brittany. And so once a person has received a loan from the SBA, can they then apply to modify that loan?
Yes, yeah, and this happens a lot. And you can use loan modification as an advocate, kind of strategically. If your client needs assistance quicker, then maybe you ask for the loan proceeds first and then do the loan modification. But all things to consider, you know, it's not uncommon that sometimes names are misspelled on loans. You want to get that corrected as quickly as possible. You can also use loan modifications to adjust the amount of the loan. So just because the SBA has approved you for $50,000 worth of proceeds doesn't mean you have to take the entire $50,000. You can ask for $15,000, and if you think that that's sufficient to do the repairs. Often, disaster survivors will get approved for an amount that would be secured. So again, anything over $25,000 is a secured loan, but they may not want to put a lien on their property, which is understandable, and so they'll take the $25,000 or less, and have those loan proceeds, but not have to put their home up as collateral. So loan modifications can be handy in kind of customizing the loan for your client.
And so next, you touched on this before, but I want to circle back to it because I think it's important. So the SBA can also provide mitigation funds to a resident. Can you expand on what that means exactly, and you know, what it's used for, and you know, essentially the dangers of the limits on mitigation funds?
Yeah, so the mitigation funds can be helpful in certain circumstances, right? It's what, you know, can potentially prevent a client from repeat flooding over and over again, or maybe being able to build their home more resilient for, you know, hurricanes or fires or things like that. Generally, it can be used for, you know, building retaining walls or grading or contouring the land, particularly for flood purposes, elevating homes out of flood-prone areas, or, you know, maybe even relocating utilities to a different part of the land so that they don't get impacted by certain disasters over and over again. And then building storm shelters as well as, you know, certain windproof windows or wind strength windows for coastal homes. The thing to remember about this mitigation fund, while it can be helpful, it can be quite expensive. The SBA can't lend past 20% of the total amount of physical damage to the real property. And then generally the disaster survivor is going to have to self-inject somewhere around 80% of the cost. So for our clients and that we represent at Trala, often they can't afford the mitigation part of that. So it's unfortunate that the requirements of that are so high and so costly, because it does really preclude some of our most disaster-prone residents and individuals from being able to access these features or these loan proceeds that may be able to, you know, put them in a better situation where they don't have to constantly deal with disaster damages. And then the overall cap on that for a business is somewhere around $2 million.
And so, and speaking of, you know, mitigation funds and making our homes more resilient for future disasters, what special consideration should residents give to flood insurance with regards to both, you know, applying for future SBA loans, and even if you could touch briefly on how that impacts Fema assistance, if possible?
Yeah, I definitely can. So sometimes with loan proceeds come insurance requirements, and that means, and often it's, you know, if you're going to get loan proceeds from the Small Business Administration, you're likely going to need to, you know, have homeowners insurance or be able to afford to get homeowners insurance. But in addition to that, some individuals, some disaster survivors will also get hit with these flood insurance requirements. And as we know, flood insurance can be quite costly for the average household. It really depends on which flood zone they're in, and maybe how many times they flooded in the past. So they may be forced to either get flood insurance and they may not be able to afford it, or take an amount of money that's less than what they need to repair their home in order to kind of bypass that flood insurance requirement. So they may have to take $25,000 instead of $50,000. But then when it comes to FEMA as well, sometimes FEMA puts group flood insurance proceeds on grant money, and FEMA may pay up to 3 years or so of those of that monthly cost or that yearly cost premium for them. But if they don't maintain the flood insurance, both with SBA or with FEMA, they may ultimately preclude themselves from disaster assistance in the future.
Awesome, thank you for that. So now that we've discussed what the SBA is, how to apply, and what type of assistance you can receive, I want to talk about the barriers to receiving an SBA loan. So first, if we can talk about prior loan history issues. So how does that impact an individual's ability to obtain an SBA loan?
Yeah, so as you saw in the application process, the SBA is going to ask a variety of financial information, and part of that's going to include whether or not they've ever defaulted on a loan in the past, and that would likely show up on their credit score. But for some of our clients, whether they've ever defaulted on an SBA loan in the past. And if the answer is yes, then they will more than likely not be eligible for a future Small Business Administration disaster loan. And that can really cause problems for our client community. If they defaulted on the loan in the past for non-payment, maybe you can make the argument as the advocate that, they were impacted financially by the pandemic, or they had recently lost their job and they weren't able to do that, but now they have a steadier income and they are better situated to take on this loan this time. But that's really going to be an argument. And like I said, the failure to maintain the required insurance, that's going to be really difficult to overcome because of the requirements that say that if you default in not maintaining that, then you've precluded yourself from ever receiving disaster assistance in the future, not just SBA, but FEMA. And it should be noted that that flood insurance requirement is tied to the land, right? So it becomes part of the requirement for that piece of property, not necessarily the individual.
And so in your practice, what other systemic issues have you noticed that have been barriers to people receiving adequate assistance through an SBA loan?
Yeah, so some of the systemic issues that arise with getting access to these loans for our client communities are, the inability to purchase or afford continuously the flood insurance requirements or the homeowner's insurance requirements. Our clients are likely to live disproportionately in more disaster-prone, flood-prone areas. They're more affordable, but are they really more affordable if you're having to basically rebuild your home every year? The argument could be made not so much. The repayment ability limitations, as we've seen with the pandemic, lower income communities are likely to be the hardest hit in these situations and need additional support. The mitigation issue I explained before is really quite unfortunate. And then with low to moderate income homeowners, property values are typically much lower or assessed lower than other families or individual disaster survivors. And then really damage assessments pose a big problem, right? The lower property values, people may see a home in the colonias and think that maybe that property isn't worth as much. Bad inspections. The SBA and FEMA don't necessarily hire licensed contractors to do property inspections, and so that poses significant problems. Yeah, there's no shortage of systemic issues that come up in disaster assistance, in particular with the Small Business Administration.
Yeah. And so next and finally, I just want to discuss the appeal and denial process. So what are the common types of appeals? And how should a resident deal with those what are the common types of reasons to appeal and reasons for denials? And then who can help an individual with an appeal and denial?
Yeah, so one really important thing to point out is that SBA determinations can be appealed, and in certain circumstances can easily be cleared up, and then in some may need some additional work. It's really helpful to have an advocate who can, go over the loan documents with your client, your disaster survivor, in detail and really explain. Now, in theory, the case managers and this isn't really dogging the case managers. I used to be one, but the case managers should be going over these documents with your client at the SBA. Case managers are attorneys as well as paralegals. And so they should be going over it, but I can tell you that, you get your good and your bad with case managers, and often, they're dealing with multiple disasters all over the country and throughout the United States territory. So, it's really helpful to have an advocate go over that and really explain to your client what they're signing and what they're getting into. Appeals like types, if a client is denied for lack of repayment ability, but your client is, maybe a seasonal worker or has some other unique financial situation that you can explain, and your client really wants to move forward with the loan process, you might be able to provide additional documentation, explanation letters, things like that, to support their repayment ability. Credit reporting, this is, a normal consumer issue. There might be something on their credit report that should have been removed several years ago, or something that's improperly showing up on their credit report. Maybe they had some identity theft issues. You're going to use your, knowledge of consumer law in order to help clear up some of those issues for your client. And then maybe that's the only barrier preventing them from being able to get this loan that they want. Primary occupancy, there's a unique issue with that within the Small Business Administration. So for FEMA, a driver's license can be helpful in showing that the disaster survivor lived in the damaged property as their primary residence, but the Small Business Administration does not use driver's licenses as primary occupancy. So you're going to need to find some other document to be able to show that, whether that be the ownership, to clear that up, or maybe showing running utility bills going on, or something to show that they were living in the property at the time of the disaster. I've helped clients who were approved for home repair loans for homes that should never be repaired. They should be torn down immediately. They are not safe to live in, and helping them get that loan modified from repair to replacement. And then, like I mentioned before, the situation with minor children, sometimes they kind of get stuck and they need an advocate to get them back to the FEMA grant assistance. And then, as I mentioned, loan amounts can be changed through that modification process. It's often helpful to have an advocate involved in that process to make sure that, your client's not taking out too much money that they won't be able to repay or likely may default on in the future. And then who can help? I would say your local legal aid. I am the attorney at Trala that gets like all of our SBA disaster loan cases default to me, and I review them. And there's not that many that come in. Often our clients are getting that FEMA grant assistance, but the local legal aid might be able to help with loan closings where they don't have to pay the financial cost of going to a title company to have that done. That can easily cost $500 to $1,000 that our clients may not be able to afford. If they don't qualify for that, we do try to look for pro bono assistance or referrals to attorneys, especially in the context in which a loan has been defaulted on and may need some assistance regarding debt collection or something like that.
Why, so much information. So thank you so much for that, Brittanny. So that's all that we wanted to share today. And now I wanted to open it up to questions. So if you have any additional questions about what Brittanny discussed today, or what Brittanny and I discussed today, please put those into the chat now. I do see that we have one question. It's from Kelsey Walker. She says, if a client doesn't have or use a computer or the internet, Is there an alternative way to apply, and how would SBA communicate them without that message portal?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't have the answer for in the pandemic, but outside of the pandemic, there were disaster recovery centers, and in the DRCs, or disaster recovery centers, SBA and Fema, as well as other voluntary agencies, and the disaster legal services table where attorneys could volunteer their time to help clients, would all be housed in the same building. And so a disaster survivor could kind of come in and get a one-stop shop for disaster assistance, and they would be able to fill out a paper application for the Small Business Administration. I would imagine now for the SBA, they can call the SBA 1-800 number and apply over the phone, or they may be able to, if that's not conducive, because who wants to provide personal identifying information over the phone for that long, they may be able to call the hotline and request a personal loan application be mailed to them, in which they can complete those forms and then mail them back. I know the SBA has done that in the past, but pre-pandemic, a DRC would be the answer.
Awesome. Kelsey says, thank you. Thank you for that question, Kelsey. We've got another question from Jara Morier. She says, or they say, are there deadlines for applying for SBA loans after the disaster? For example, they're in Iowa. They have a client who has $40,000 or more damage to their home, but they never applied for an SBA loan. Could they have that client apply now, or is the deadline over with?
I don't know the specific deadline for the derecho storms in Iowa. I can tell you this, the SBA deadlines are generally longer than the FEMA application deadlines. And even if the deadline may have passed, like with FEMA, there's a 120-day good cause exception that you may be able to argue an application. And I'm pretty sure the SBA also has that. I just don't know the actual number of days that they'll extend past that. There is definitely room to argue it. And so if they do apply and then are told that they're past their eligibility deadline, you may have that good cause extension in there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for that question, Jara. I don't see any other questions. We are 3 minutes to the end of this presentation. So I'll go ahead and just first say, thank you so much, Brittanny, for this wonderful information. I know I speak for anyone who views this presentation that when I say that you are incredibly knowledgeable about this subject, and I'm incredibly grateful to be able to learn from you this afternoon. So thank you so much for appearing and for working with me on this presentation.
Well, thank you for having me. And then if anybody has any questions, I'm sure we can find a way to get my email address out to you, and I can do my best to try to answer those questions for you, or maybe provide some resources.
Otherwise, we both work for legal aid organizations. Brittanny, as I said in the beginning, works for Texas RioGrande Legal Aid, which is in Texas, obviously. So if you have some legal issues there with regards to SBA loans, feel free to contact her or Texas RioGrande Legal Aid. If not, or if you're in Florida, I work with Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. So feel free to give us a call as well if you have any questions about SBA loans. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation. Thank you all for joining us here today.